The air hangs heavy, thick with a cloying, sweet perfume that isn't mine. It clings to the velvet drapes, coats the leather of the armchair he used to read in, settles like dust on the polished surfaces of the life we built. His life now, I suppose. Our life, poisoned. I stand in the doorway of the living room, the place where we used to curl up on rainy Saturdays, where we hosted friends, where we talked about the future. Now, he sits across the room, his posture relaxed, almost smug. His hand rests on her knee. Her. Sarah. A name that tastes like ash in my mouth. She smiles at him, a possessive little quirk of the lips, and then her eyes flick to me. There's no apology there. Only triumph. My husband. The man who swore forever. His eyes, once warm and familiar, are cold chips of blue ice. They look at me, but they don't see me. I'm a ghost in my own home, a relic he hasn't bothered to remove yet. My chest tightens, a familiar vice-like grip that leaves me breathless. The Persian rug under my bare feet feels alien. This house, every corner of it, screams with the silence of forgotten promises. He clears his throat, a small sound in the vast, aching room. Elizabeth, he says. My name. A formality now. A courtesy he extends, barely. Sarah's smile widens. She shifts closer to him. They are a tableau of casual cruelty, painted in the colors of my broken world. The grandfather clock in the hall ticks, each beat a hammer blow against my eardrums. It's marking time, reminding me how long I've been standing here, watching, dying inside. The scent of her perfume is suffocating. I want to scream, to rip down the drapes, to shatter the clock, to make some kind of sound that isn't the quiet whisper of my own despair. But I stand frozen, rooted to the spot, a statue in a museum of my failed marriage. The perfect wife, observing the demolition of her life from the sidelines. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Before the inheritance, our life was comfortable. Not flashy, not extravagant, but comfortable in the way that feels earned. He had his tech startup, a small but promising venture built in a garage, fueled by late nights and cheap coffee. I had my quiet job, enough to pay the bills, build a little savings, take a nice vacation once a year. We were a team. We talked for hours about his dreams, my dreams, our dreams. We furnished our first apartment with hand-me-downs and IKEA, then upgraded, slowly, deliberately, filling our home with pieces we loved, pieces that held memories. This house. Our home. It wasn't grand, not by the standards of the people who inherit fortunes, but it was ours. Every room, every piece of art on the wall, every book on the shelf, felt like an extension of us. We talked about having children here, about growing old on the porch swing. It felt real. It felt solid. It felt like forever. He was ambitious, driven, yes, but there was a kindness there, a vulnerability. He'd come home late, smelling of stale coffee and code, eyes tired, but he'd still hold me, tell me about his day, listen to mine. We navigated the usual bumps and bruises of marriage, minor disagreements, stressful work periods, family drama. But we faced them together. There was a shared history, a shared understanding that went deeper than words. We were each other's anchor in the chaos of the world. We were happy. Genuinely, deeply, uncomplicatedly happy. Then, the letter came. An official-looking envelope. It was from a law firm we'd never heard of. An uncle he barely remembered, a distant relative who'd made his fortune in something obscure and complicated, had passed away. No wife, no children. And he'd left his entire estate to my husband. A name in a dusty will, a last-minute addition maybe, a whim. We opened the letter together, sitting on the floor of the living room, the same room where I now stood like a ghost. The number stared back at us, stark and unbelievable, $450 million. $450 million. It wasn't just money. It was a seismic shift. It was a cheat code for life. It was supposed to change things for the better, right? More freedom, less stress, the ability to do good in the world, to build something even bigger, to finally take that trip around the world we always dreamed of. We talked about it, wide-eyed, breathless. We made lists, charities we wanted to support, ideas for his business, scaled up beyond imagination. A foundation, helping our families. The excitement was electric. It felt like a shared adventure, the ultimate test of our partnership. We promised each other it wouldn't change us, that we'd stay grounded, stay true to each other.
We swore on it.
The change wasn't instant. It was insidious. Subtle at first. A new suit, a more expensive watch. Lunches in places he couldn't afford before. He hired more people for the company, moved into a sleek office downtown. All logical steps, right? Growing the business. But his time became less and less mine. Late nights weren't about coding anymore. They were about networking, meetings, deals when he was home. He was distracted, on his phone constantly. The easy conversation dried up. His eyes, when they weren't glued to a screen, seemed to look right through me. He started talking about our old life with a hint of disdain, like it was something he had tolerated, not something he had built with me. The first time I heard the name Sarah, it was casual. Sarah from the marketing team then. Sarah and I had a great meeting then. Sarah's really brilliant. The compliments grew more frequent, more effusive. He'd stay out later. Excuses became flimsy. The air between us thickened with unspoken things. I felt it, a cold knot forming in my stomach. The late nights, the evasiveness, the way he'd suddenly clam up if I asked a simple question about his day. My intuition screamed, but I tried to be the understanding wife. The wife who knew her husband was under pressure, building something big. Then came the business trip. A week in New York. He was distant on the phone. Short answers. No, I miss you. When he came back, something was different. The air around him felt charged, brittle. He avoided my gaze. That night, he stayed up late, working or pretending to. I lay in bed, the space beside me cold and empty, a cavern where warmth used to be. The confirmation came in the cruelest way. A text message notification popped up on his tablet, left open on the counter. A tablet I sometimes used. A message from Sarah. It wasn't about marketing. It was intimate. A pet name, a reference to a shared hotel room, plans for tomorrow night. My breath hitched. The kitchen seemed to tilt. I picked up the tablet, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I scrolled. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a painful throb. Page after page of messages. Months of them. A parallel life, meticulously documented, played out in stolen moments and whispered words, funded by the inheritance that was supposed to be ours. The pain was physical, a tearing sensation in my chest. My knees buckled, and I sank to the cold kitchen floor, the tablet clutched in my hand, the screen a hateful, glowing testament to my husband's betrayal. It wasn't just the affair. It was the deceit, the lies, the calculated cruelty of living this double life while pretending everything was normal, while sleeping beside me. When he finally came downstairs, saw me on the floor, saw the tablet, his face went pale. There was a flicker of panic, quickly replaced by something cold and hard. He didn't apologize. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't even look ashamed. He just accepted it, like it was an inevitable conclusion to a chapter he was finished with. Elizabeth, he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. I didn't know how to tell you. How to tell me? My voice was a raw whisper. You didn't want to tell me. You wanted to keep me in the dark while you built this other life. He sighed, a sound of impatience. It's not that simple, isn't it? I managed to stand, gripping the counter for support. You found someone else. You lied about it. You used the money that was supposed to secure our future to build a future with her. He rubbed his temples. The money. It changes things. You don't understand. No, I said, the whisper gaining strength, hardening into ice. I think I understand perfectly. The money didn't change you. It just revealed who you really were. He moved out that night, packed a bag, said he'd make arrangements later. The house felt vast and empty without him, yet somehow still contaminated by his presence, by her ghost clinging to the air. I spent the next few weeks in a blur of pain and confusion. I tried calling him. He was distant, evasive. He talked about needing space, about being unhappy for a long time, a lie that stung worse than the affair itself, about how the inheritance had made him see things clearly. See that I wasn't part of his vision anymore. The cruelty was breathtaking. Then, the ultimate indignity. A few weeks after he left, while I was still reeling, still trying to process the debris of my life, I came home from work to find a moving van in the driveway. Not ours. Boxes were being carried into the house. My house. I stood on the sidewalk, frozen, watching. Then I saw her.
Sarah.
Directing the movers, a proprietary air about her, pointing to where furniture should go. Furniture that wasn't ours. I walked into the house, my feet moving on autopilot. They were placing her couch in our living room, her art on our walls. She turned, saw me standing there, and her smile faltered for just a second before hardening. "Elizabeth," she said, her voice too sweet, too casual. "I didn't expect you today." My husband appeared from the kitchen, holding a box. He stopped dead when he saw me. His face was a mixture of annoyance and something that might have been guilt, but quickly vanished. "What is happening?" I asked, my voice trembling. He set the box down. "Sarah's moving in." I stared at him, at her, at the strange furniture filling my home. "Moving in? Into our house." "It's my house now, Elizabeth," he said, his voice flat, final. "I own it. The mortgage is paid off." He said it like it explained everything. Like paying off the mortgage with his new money somehow erased my claim, our history, our marriage.
"But
we're still married," I stammered. "We're getting divorced," he corrected, his tone dismissive. "My lawyers are handling the paperwork. Sarah needs a place to live, and this house is more than big enough." Sarah stepped forward, placing a hand on his arm. "It made sense," she said, her voice smooth as venom. "It's so much closer to the office for him. Closer to the office." As if that was the only factor. As if her presence wasn't a deliberate, calculated humiliation. "You're moving your mistress into my home," I repeated, the words tasting like bile. He flinched slightly at the word mistress, but recovered quickly. "She's not my mistress. She's my partner. In life. And soon in business." He said partner with a reverence he'd never used for me, even when we were building everything from scratch. The betrayal twisted inside me, sharper than ever. He was erasing me, replacing me, and doing it under my own roof. Living in that house became unbearable. He didn't force me out immediately. Legally, he couldn't yet, not without a court order. But he made it clear I wasn't wanted. Sarah took over the kitchen, rearranged the furniture. Her scent was everywhere. They acted like I was an inconvenience, an annoying roommate who hadn't gotten the memo. They'd have dinner together, laughing, while I sat alone in the spare room, pretending to read. I could hear their muffled conversations, their footsteps overhead. The house, once a sanctuary, became a prison. Every corner held a ghost of a memory, now tainted by their presence. The cruelty was exquisite, a slow, deliberate torture. He wasn't just leaving me. He was rubbing my face in his new life, built on the ashes of our old one. I tried talking to him, again. I begged him to reconsider, if not the marriage, then at least the living arrangement. For decency's sake. He was unmoved. Cold. He repeated that I didn't fit into his future. He offered a settlement. A pittance compared to his fortune, insulting in its inadequacy. His lawyers sent letters, aggressive, dismissive. They painted me as a gold digger, someone trying to take advantage of his sudden wealth.
Me.
The woman who had supported him, believed in him, for years when he had nothing but a dream and debt. I hired a lawyer. A good one, recommended by a friend. She was sympathetic, competent. But she explained the uphill battle. The inheritance was separate property, acquired after the marriage, but arguably not a direct result of marital effort. The house was paid off with separate funds. While I was entitled to marital assets and support, His legal team was positioning themselves to minimize it, painting a picture of a wife who hadn't contributed significantly to this level of success. And with his nearly unlimited funds, they could drag it out forever, bury us in paperwork, bleed me dry financially and emotionally. The early days of fighting felt like flailing in the dark. Each legal letter was a punch to the gut. Each interaction with him was a reminder of how much he had changed, how little he cared. I felt powerless. The disparity in resources was crushing. My lawyer's fees mounted. I watched my savings dwindle. Meanwhile, he and Sarah lived large in my house, appearing in society pages at galas, her draped in expensive clothes, his arm around her, beaming. It felt like he was untouchable, shielded by his wall of money. I'd lie awake at night in that spare room, the muffled sounds of their life together seeping through the walls, and feel a suffocating despair. How could this happen? How could the man I loved become this person? How could he be so cruel? I was losing everything, my husband, my home, my sense of security, my dignity. It felt like drowning. The legal process was slow, draining, filled with technical jargon and cold calculations. It stripped away the emotional reality of what was happening and reduced it to numbers, assets, liabilities. My lawyer fought hard, but her hands were tied by the law, by the precedents, by the sheer financial might of the opposition. Every small victory felt insignificant against the backdrop of the life they were building, openly, brazenly, in the ruins of mine. The constant presence of Sarah in the house was a unique form of torment. She wasn't overtly hostile, which was somehow worse. She was polite, almost pitying. She'd leave her things around, small markers of her territory, a scarf on a chair, a book on the bedside table in our bedroom, now their bedroom. She made it clear, without saying it aloud, that she belonged and I didn't. She was the queen bee, and I was the unwelcome drone, lingering too long. The air in the house grew thick with this unspoken tension, this cold war waged with passive aggression and strategic placement of personal items. I felt like I was living in a bad movie, a grotesque parody of domestic life. There was one morning, I went into the kitchen to make coffee, and she was there, humming softly, unpacking groceries, gourmet, expensive things I wouldn't have bought. She looked up, smiled that too sweet smile. "Morning, Elizabeth," she said. "Did you sleep well?" The implication hung in the air. Did I sleep well, alone in the spare room, while she slept soundly in the king-sized bed I'd picked out, next to the man I married? I just nodded, unable to speak, and retreated with my coffee cup, my hands shaking. It was 1,000 tiny cuts, day after day. My lawyer suggested mediation. We sat in a sterile conference room. He was there with Sarah and his lead attorney, a shark with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. I was there with my lawyer. It was humiliating. He spoke in detached, legal terms, offering what he considered fair, an amount that wouldn't even cover my legal fees and find a decent new place to live long-term. He talked about my lack of contribution to his current success. Sarah sat beside him, nodding in agreement, occasionally whispering something in his ear. I looked at him, this stranger who wore my husband's face, and felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't the man I loved. This wasn't even a decent human being. This was a caricature of wealth and arrogance, stripped of any empathy or grace. The mediation failed, predictably. He wasn't interested in compromise. He wanted to win, to crush me, to prove that his money made him invincible. He was advised to offer more, to avoid a lengthy court battle, but he refused. "She'll take what I offer," I heard him say to his lawyer as they left the room. "She has no choice." That phrase echoed in my head. She has no choice. It burrowed deep, mingling with the despair. Maybe he was right. Maybe I didn't have a choice. Maybe I was destined to be a footnote in his origin story, the discarded wife who couldn't keep up with his stratospheric rise. The thought was a bitter poison. I walked out of that building feeling defeated, diminished. The city outside, once a vibrant backdrop to our shared life, now felt indifferent, imposing. I went back to the empty spare room in my own home, the air still thick with her perfume. I looked around at the borrowed life happening beyond my door. I felt a rage building inside me, a slow, burning fire that started in my gut and spread through my veins. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't even just about the betrayal. It was about the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it. The way he had weaponized his wealth, the way he had used our home as a stage for his new life, the way he thought he could just erase me. She has no choice. The words repeated, but this time, they didn't sound like a death sentence. They sounded like a challenge. My father. My father wasn't part of my everyday life in a hands-on way. My parents divorced when I was young, and while my mother raised me, my father was elsewhere, building his empire. He was a quiet force, a name whispered in certain circles, a man whose business acumen was legendary, his network vast and powerful. He wasn't a warm, cuddly dad. He was intense, strategic, ruthless when he needed to be. We had a relationship, yes, but it was more about respect and occasional, carefully planned visits than casual chats about my day. He knew about my marriage, had met my husband once, years ago, and had given him a quiet, piercing look I hadn't understood at the time. I hadn't wanted to involve him. This was my life, my problem. I wanted to handle it myself, to prove I was strong enough. But I was losing. Badly. And sitting there, surrounded by the evidence of their takeover, the cold calculation in his eyes during mediation, the triumphant smirk on Sarah's face, I knew that handling it myself in a conventional way wasn't enough. Conventional wasn't working against unconventional cruelty and limitless funds. I had a choice. I could accept defeat, take the pittance he offered, and try to rebuild my life from scratch, carrying the scars of his betrayal and humiliation. Or I could unleash a different kind of force. A force he didn't know I had access to. A force that could match his money and raise it exponentially. My hand trembled as I reached for my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the one I rarely used. My father's private number. I stared at it for a long moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Bringing him into this wouldn't be a simple phone call. It would open a door to a world of power and strategy that I usually kept at arm's length. It would mean escalating this from a nasty divorce into something far bigger, with unforeseen consequences. But the thought of his complacent face, the certainty in his eyes when he said she has no choice, fueled the fire. I would have a choice. And that choice was to make him regret every single thing he had done. I took a deep breath and dialed. It rang twice before his assistant answered. I gave my name. There was a brief pause. Then my father's voice, calm and level, the sound of a man used to being in control. Elizabeth, it's good to hear from you. Everything all right? His voice was kind, in his way, but beneath it was an expectation of purpose. I didn't call for small talk. Dad, I said, my voice steadier than I expected.
No.
Everything is not all right, I told him. Not the emotional turmoil, not the pain of the betrayal, not the humiliating details of living with Sarah. I gave him the facts, the inheritance,
The shift.
the affair, the move-in, the divorce proceedings, his legal strategy, his arrogance, his belief that I was trapped. I laid it out clinically, stripping away the emotion as much as I could, presenting it as a problem, a strategic situation. He listened without interruption. The silence on his end was charged. When I finished, he didn't say anything for a long moment. I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, analyzing, calculating. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, thoughtful. So, he acquired significant capital. Believes it makes him invincible. Has leveraged it to attempt to eliminate you, both personally and financially. And he's using his company, which he wants to expand with this capital, as his primary vehicle. Yes, I said. He thinks the money means he wins. That I have no leverage. Leverage is relative, my father said. It depends on what currency you're dealing in. He's dealing in dollars. There are other currencies. He said I have no choice. I repeated, the word still a raw spot. There was a hard edge in my father's voice when he replied. Everyone has a choice, Elizabeth. Especially when someone believes they've eliminated all of yours, he paused. You want to teach him a lesson? I want him to understand that his money didn't make him powerful, I said, the words chosen carefully. It just made him careless and cruel. I want him to face the consequences of that. Consequences, my father mused. He's built his identity around this company, hasn't he? It's the engine of his new life, the justification for everything. This inheritance wasn't just money to him, it was fuel for the fire he was already building. And Sarah is part of that new vision. Yes, I confirmed. The company is everything to him now. And he's using the inheritance to scale it up, my father said. Expanding, hiring, making acquisitions maybe? Investing heavily? Yes, I said. He talks about it constantly. Massive growth. Becoming a major player. Leveraging every penny. I would imagine, my father mused aloud. Taking risks he wouldn't have dared before because he has the cushion. The safety net. Probably, I said. Safety nets can be removed, my father said, and there was a chilling calmness in his tone. Tell me everything about this company. Structure. Investors. Suppliers. Customers. His key people. Everything you know. I spent the next hour on the phone, pouring out every detail I could remember about his company, from the early days in the garage to the recent expansion. Names of key employees he'd mentioned, suppliers he relied on, major clients, potential acquisition targets he'd talked about, his growth strategy, his vulnerabilities. I told him about Sarah's role, now ostensibly in marketing, but clearly more. My father listened intently, occasionally asking a sharp, precise question that showed he was already building a framework, identifying pressure points. When I finished, he was silent again for a moment. All right, Elizabeth, he said finally. I understand. This isn't a simple matter of divorce settlement anymore. This is about re-establishing order, reminding someone that actions have consequences, especially when they underestimate the person they are trying to discard. So, I asked, my breath held tight in my chest. So, he said, go dark. Don't interact with him unless absolutely necessary through lawyers. Don't react to him or her in the house. Be a ghost. Let him think he's won this part. Let him feel comfortable, secure in his arrogance. Meanwhile, my team will start looking into his company. Every angle. His financials. His partners. His dependencies. We'll find the weakest point. Or points. What are you going to do? Leverage, my father repeated. He thinks he has all the leverage. We'll find where he is exposed. Every company, no matter how successful, has dependencies. Suppliers, distributors, key contracts, financing, intellectual property, personnel. If you can control those dependencies, you can control the company. It's like cutting the strings on a puppet. He paused. This won't be fast. Or loud at first. It will be quiet, strategic. We'll start pulling threads. See what unravels. This inheritance made him strong, yes, but it also made him reckless. He probably hasn't built the kind of solid, long-term relationships that truly protect a business. He thinks money is the only shield. It isn't. Relationships are. Influence is. Control is. Over the next few weeks, I followed my father's instructions. I became a phantom in the house. I ate alone, stayed in my room, left early, came back late. I avoided them as much as possible. When we did cross paths, I was polite, distant. I didn't react to their laughter, their intimacy, her obvious attempts to flaunt her new position. I was a statue, unmoving, unfeeling, or so I pretended. Inside, the fire still burned, but it was controlled now, banked, waiting. He seemed almost disappointed by my lack of reaction. He probably expected tears, arguments, hysterics. My silence, my cold detachment, seemed to unnerving him slightly. Sarah, however, bloomed, becoming more confident, more at ease, truly believing she had won. Good. Let them believe that. Meanwhile, I was in contact with my father's team. A discreet lawyer specializing in corporate law, an analyst who dug into financial records, a private investigator who verified information. They worked quietly, efficiently like shadows. They confirmed his company was expanding rapidly, perhaps too rapidly. He was taking on significant debt, leveraging his inheritance not just as cash but as collateral. He was dependent on a few key suppliers for critical components. He had just finalized a major contract with a huge client, a deal that would double his company's size overnight, but failure to deliver would cripple him. And he was in the process of acquiring a smaller competitor, a move that was stretching his resources thin. My father's strategy became clear. Identify the pressure points. The suppliers, the big client, the acquisition. Find a way to insert leverage. Not to destroy the company outright, that wasn't the goal. The goal was to control it. To take away his toy. To take away the foundation of his new life, the thing he had prioritized over me, over our history, over everything. The plan was complex, multi-pronged. It involved discreet conversations with key suppliers, leveraging long-standing relationships my father had in the industry, subtle shifts in delivery schedules, changes in contract terms that would create bottlenecks for my husband's company. It involved quiet inquiries to the major client, raising concerns about potential risks, supply chain issues, managerial stability. It involved strategically buying up shares in the smaller company he was trying to acquire, driving up the price, making the acquisition more difficult, more costly, forcing him to commit more of his precious capital. It was a slow tightening of a noose, invisible to the victim until it was too late. My father explained it to me in simple terms. Think of it like this, he said. He has built a beautiful, fast car with his new money. But he forgot to check the tires, the engine oil, the brake fluid. He's flooring it, thinking the money is the road itself. We're just placing a few strategically located roadblocks. Small things at first. Things that look like bad luck. A delayed shipment. A supplier problem. A client suddenly asking for more stringent guarantees. Things that cause stress, delay, extra cost. Things that make the engine sputter. The reports I received were clinical, detached. Supplier A experiencing unforeseen production delay. Client B requesting additional performance bond. Acquisition target share price increasing unexpectedly. My husband's company was hitting snags. Small ones at first. I could see the tension in him when he was home. More time on the phone, his voice sharp, frustrated. Late nights weren't just about deals anymore. They were about fixing problems. Sarah tried to be supportive, but even her cheerful facade seemed strained. The easy confidence they'd shared was eroding, replaced by stress. The pressure increased gradually. Suppliers started demanding stricter terms, larger deposits. The acquisition target became more demanding, dragging out negotiations, raising the price. The big client, spooked by the concerns raised by my father's proxies, started putting clauses in the contract that penalized delays or failures. My husband was forced to spend more of his inheritance, not on expansion, but on shoring up his position, paying extra fees, finding alternative suppliers at higher costs, trying to keep the deal with the big client from collapsing. The safety net he thought he had was dissolving, thread by thread. He grew more erratic, snapping at Sarah, slamming doors. The arrogant confidence was replaced by a harried, cornered look. He couldn't figure out why everything was going wrong at once. He blamed bad luck, market fluctuations, incompetent staff. He never suspected it was orchestrated. Why would he? He had beaten me. I was a ghost in his house, a non-threat. He was looking outward for the enemy, never inward, never at the life he had destroyed. Then came the final phase. The simultaneous squeeze. My father's team timed it perfectly. The crucial components from his main supplier were delayed indefinitely due to an unforeseen logistical issue, a polite term for my father's influence. The acquisition target, after weeks of negotiation, suddenly pulled out, citing unresolvable differences. My father's team bought the company themselves, quietly, through shell corporations. And the big client, seeing the mounting problems and the failed acquisition, exercised a clause in the contract, threatening to pull out unless he could provide immediate, ironclad guarantees of delivery, guarantees that were now impossible without the key components and the acquired company's resources. He was trapped. His supply chain was broken. His planned acquisition was gone. His make-or-break client was walking away. And he had sunk a significant portion of his inheritance into the failing acquisition attempt and the now impossible preparations for the major contract. The safety net was gone. The $450 million cushion had been spent, tied up, or rendered useless by the strategic roadblocks. He was exposed. Vulnerable. The fast car had run out of road, its engine sputtering, steam rising. The day it all came to a head started like any other, if any other, included a pervasive sense of dread mixed with cold anticipation. I knew the pieces were in place. I had received the final updates from my father's team. The calls were coming. The pressure was reaching its breaking point. He was in the living room on the phone pacing. Sarah sat nearby, watching him with a worried expression. He was shouting something about suppliers, contracts, catastrophic failure. His face was bright red, veins bulging on his forehead. He wasn't the calm, confident man who had sat there with his hand on Sarah's knee weeks ago. He was unraveling. I walked into the room. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I stood tall, my spine straight, my gaze steady. He saw me in the doorway and stopped yelling, lowering the phone slightly. His eyes, wild with panic, met mine. For the first time in a long time, he saw me. Really saw me. Not as a relic, not as a ghost, but as a presence. What? He barked into the phone. He listened for a moment, his eyes widening in disbelief. No. That's impossible. You can't. Who? He went silent, listening. His face drained of color. Sarah stood up, looking at him questioningly. He dropped the phone. It clattered on the rug. He stood there, frozen, his chest heaving. What is it? Sarah asked, her voice tight with fear. He didn't answer her. He just stared at me, his eyes filled with a horrifying dawning comprehension. Elizabeth, he whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a realization. Yes, I said, my voice quiet, steady, carrying across the room. Yes, Robert. He took a step towards me, stumbled. You did this. I didn't do anything, I said. Actions have consequences, Robert. You taught me that. But how? His voice was a strangled gasp. Who? You thought money was your shield, I said, walking slowly into the room. Sarah shrank back, her eyes darting between us, finally understanding that something far bigger than a messy divorce was happening. You thought $450 million made you invincible. You thought you could just discard everything and everyone who didn't fit your new picture. You thought you had all the leverage. I stopped a few feet away from him. You are wrong. He looked around the room, at the expensive furniture Sarah had brought in, at Sarah herself, clinging to his arm now, her face pale. The symbols of his new life. They bought out Sterling, he stammered, referring to the acquisition target he'd lost. They cut off the supply lines. Johnson and Hayes just pulled the plug on the big contract. All of them. Within an hour, he looked back at me, terror in his eyes. Who is they, Elizabeth? I allowed myself a small, cold smile. You remember meeting my father, Robert? Years ago? The quiet man who didn't say much. His eyes widened further. He knew the name. Everyone in certain business circles did. The pieces clicked into place for him, a horrifying mosaic of his own undoing. The quiet calls, the subtle pressures, the bad luck that had been dogging his company. It wasn't random. It was orchestrated. And the woman he had scorned, the wife he thought he could just erase, had been the one to initiate it. No, he breathed, shaking his head. No, you wouldn't. Your father. Why would he? Why? I repeated. Because you hurt his daughter, Robert. Because you thought you could take everything from me and face no consequences. Because you said I had no choice. I paused, letting the words sink in. Well, now you have a choice. You can watch everything you built, everything you leveraged your fortune on, crumble. Or, he waited, his eyes fixed on mine. Or, I said, my voice dropping to a level tone that held more power than any shout. You can give me what I'm owed. The house, fully transferred to my name, free and clear. A settlement that reflects the life you promised me before the money changed you. And a significant stake. A controlling stake. In the company you so carelessly built on the back of your temporary fortune.
Control.
Of my company. He looked aghast. It won't be your company anymore, I said. Not really.
It will be.
Managed. Stabilized. Put back on track. With new leadership. Leadership that understands the value of relationships. Of loyalty. Leadership that isn't reckless or cruel. Sarah gasped softly beside him. You can't, he said, though there was no conviction in his voice. Oh, I can, I assured him. My father's team is already in position. They have the leverage. The suppliers, the clients, the investors you suddenly need more than ever. They hold the strings now, Robert. And they're acting on my behalf. I gestured around the room at the symbols of their life together. This was built on sand, on arrogance, on the belief that money solves everything. It doesn't. Not when you're dealing with people who understand true power. He stared at me, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. He looked at Sarah, then back at me, a desperate, hunted look in his eyes. The man who had thought he was a king suddenly saw the throne pulled out from under him. The weight of it, the sudden, complete reversal of fortune, the understanding that his arrogance had led him not just to losing me, but to losing the very foundation of his new identity, was too much. His eyes rolled back in his head. He made a choked sound, a gurgling gasp, and then he collapsed. His legs buckled, and he crumpled to the floor, a heap of expensive clothes and shattered ambition. Sarah screamed, dropping to her knees beside him, frantically calling his name. I stood there, watching him on the floor, her cries filling the air. There was no triumph, not really, only a vast, cold emptiness. The man I loved was gone long ago, replaced by this shell, this cautionary tale of what sudden wealth could do. This collapsing figure on the floor wasn't my victory. It was the final, pathetic act of a tragedy he had written himself. He was taken to the hospital. Stress, they said. Likely a mild heart attack or severe panic attack, brought on by extreme pressure.
He survived.
Sarah stayed with him, at least for a while. I signed the papers my father's lawyer brought. The house was mine. The settlement was fair, more than fair, enough to secure my future many times over. And the controlling stake in his company was transferred to a holding entity managed by my father's people, effectively putting it under my indirect control. I didn't visit him in the hospital. I didn't need to. The message was delivered. The consequences were felt. He had his choice, and he had made it years ago when he chose money and arrogance over loyalty and love. This was just the inevitable conclusion. I stayed in the house for a little while after he was released from the hospital and went to stay elsewhere. Sarah was gone. Her furniture was gone. The air slowly cleared of her perfume, replaced by the faint scent of nothing. Just the old familiar smell of the house itself. But it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a battleground, silent and empty, haunted by ghosts. The victory felt hollow. I had regained what was taken, and then some, but the cost had been immense. I had seen the depth of betrayal, the corrupting influence of unchecked greed, the cold, strategic power of my own family. I sold the house. Every memory in it felt tainted. I downsized, moved to a different neighborhood, a different city even. I didn't need the money anymore, not in the way I thought I did. The inheritance he received, the source of all this destruction, had ultimately funded his own downfall and my liberation, not through my taking his money, but through his losing everything because he thought money was enough. I started over. Quieter. More grounded. I learned that true security doesn't come from a number in a bank account. It comes from integrity, from resilience, from the relationships you build, and the people you trust. And sometimes, it comes from knowing when to stop fighting fair and unleash a different kind of power. My father's power was a tool, a weapon. I used it to defend myself, to correct an injustice. But wielding it, even indirectly, felt heavy. It showed me a side of the world, a side of myself that was cold and calculating. I don't wish him ill, not anymore.
Pity, maybe.
He lost more than money or a company. He lost himself. The man I married is gone. The man who collapsed on the floor is just a shell, living with the consequences of his choices. Life is quieter now. Simpler. The wound is still there, a scar, but it doesn't ache as much. I rebuilt, not the life I had, but a new one. A life where my value isn't measured in dollars and where betrayal isn't tolerated. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.